Welcome to the Quality Agency's Getting to Know the Standards Information Session webinar. I'm Gabby Carpinato. The Quality Agency has been running these face-to-face Getting to Know the Standards sessions all over Australia since September. And to date, we've actually run 112 sessions across the country, and we've had over 2,500 people join us at those sessions. By December, we expect to have run about 147 sessions across the country. So if you've actually already attended one of those sessions, today's webinar is actually going to follow the same content, but we still would like you to join in. So for today, there are actually a number of resources we'd suggest you might want to refer to during the session. The first is the Standards Guidance Fact Sheet. This is available on the resources section of your webinar window, but also from our website. And in addition to the Standards Fact Sheet is the guidance, resources and materials. I've got a hard copy here, but you can also access these through the resources section on the webinar window, but on our website, the Quality Agency website, which is aacqa.gov.au. So we're going to get started with a couple of polls today. We've asked these questions at the face-to-face sessions, and we'd like you, if you're sitting at your desk, we'd like you to respond to this question. Have you read the new aged care quality standards? If you can indicate if you have. The standards were passed into legislation in September, but the sector has actually had visibility of the standards as part of the Department of Health's co-design process from early on in the year. And it looks like about 75% of our audience today have engaged and read the new standards, which is fantastic. On to our next question, which is the next bit. Have you engaged with the Quality Agency's guidance materials? Now, the guidance materials were actually launched at our Better Practice for the Conference, Better Practice for the Future conference in August this year. And we're going to actually look at the guidance materials in a bit more detail. Oh, that's great, even more people. So over 80% of our audience today have engaged with the guidance materials. Well done, everybody. So thanks for responding. That's excellent engagement with the standards and the guidance. So hopefully today's session will build upon that. So over today, in the next hour or so, we're going to be looking at the intent and application of the new standards. We're going to explore the guidance material and the structure. We're going to talk about how the guidance material can help you undertake a self-assessment. And we're also going to talk about how you can prepare for quality assessment against the new standards. And for those of you, about 25 to 30% who haven't had enough time yet, the good news is you've got time and today can be your starting point. So the first assessments against the new standards are expected to commence from 1 July 2019, and this is when providers will be expected to comply with the new standards. So we hope this session is a way to get everyone on the same page. There won't be sufficient time to cover all of the standards and requirements in great detail, but again, as I said, this is a starting point for you, and we hope that after this session you'll be able to spend some time to understand the standards and how the new standards will influence your organisation's culture and inform your practice. So let's get started. Today, I'm joined by two of my colleagues from the agency, Peter Kelpie. Peter is a senior quality surveyor and he works out of our regional office in Melbourne. And also Atewa Ligorio. Atewa is a senior policy officer and she's also a registered quality surveyor and she works with me in our national office in Parramatta. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby.
So, Atewa, let's get started with some background as to why we have a new set of aged care quality standards.
Thank you, Gabby. So the new standards have been designed to make it easier for consumers, their families, carers and representatives to understand what they can expect from a service. The standards will make regulations simpler and for providers working across multiple aged care services. Look, the aim is to encourage innovation, excellence and continuous improvement. The new standards will create a single quality framework and replace the 4 current standards. So your residential, home care, National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Flexi Care, and the transitional care standards. The Department of Health has been responsible for the development of the new aged care standards. However, the quality agency, providers and stakeholders have been involved in the process, in particular, the extensive review, evaluation, and also the piloting of the draft standards and the guidance material. There's more information on the processes, some of the submissions, and also the outcomes available on the Quality Agency website.
Thanks, Atewa. But also to go to that context of why, I think it's important that we understand there was a compelling case for change. The current regulatory aged care frameworks have been in place for almost over 20 years since the introduction of the Aged Care Act in 1997. And I'm sure everyone would agree that over that time, the sector has changed. Consumers and the community and consumers' expectations have changed, and policies have changed to be more consumer focused. So, for example, we've had the introduction of consumer-directed care in home care in the past couple of years. So there's definitely been a move to a more consumer-focused set of standards, and generally, we've also had the Aged Care Roadmap, which was a sector-led paper that the goal is to create a more sustainable and consumer-led aged care market. So that's the overall context of why. But let's actually look at what's new. Peter, can you tell us a little bit about what's new in the new aged care regulatory framework?
Thank you, Gabby. The new standards really strengthen the focus on quality outcomes for the consumer. And as you've noticed, each standard has a clear consumer outcome and is designed to cover all aged care services. These standards underpin the diversity and unique life experience of the people you support and the requirement to treat a person with dignity and respect, acknowledging their identity, culture and diversity. It is the core of these new standards. The Quality Agency will be expecting services to demonstrate they understand and apply this in all aspects of care and services. You'll notice page 10 in the guidance material highlights examples of how these may be demonstrated. And as I've mentioned, there is one set of standards for all aged care services. And how these standards are applied will depend on the type of services that you are actually operating. Standard 5, for example, relates to the physical environment that organisations provide for residential care and centre-based support. It doesn't apply to the consumer's home or extend to all environments that consumers might visit, like a library, taking people shopping. However, there is an expectation that an organisation will be aware of any safety issues related to community access. There are requirements in the standard that specifically address supporting consumers to have ongoing partnerships, optimise their independence, health and well-being, to manage risks, to have open disclosure when things go wrong, by having workforce planning and antimicrobial stewardship. These are just to name but a few. And as you work through the guidance material, you'll see a new language that centres around the consumer and how they are supported to live the life they choose.
Thanks, Peter. So it's important to note that there are 8 standards, which most of you are familiar with, and there are actually 42 requirements. And they set out the standards of care and services that the community and the 1.3 million aged care consumers can expect from their government Commonwealth-funded aged care services. It's important to note also that achievement of these standards is expected every day on a day-to-day basis, and they should be able to be demonstrated at any time, not just when the Quality Agency is assessing you. So we're going to actually now have a little look and talk about each of the standards. And there's also something new in the standards. So we've got new language. We're talking about requirements now. And there's actually some new structure to the standards. So Atewa, can you take us through the structure of the new standards?
Thank you, Gabby. So each standard is expressed in 3 ways. You have your consumer outcome, your organisational statement, and the requirement. So the consumer outcome are written as I statements. These statements provide an overarching principle for each of the standards. So in other words, what to expect or the expectation, the experience and the outcome for the consumer. The organisational statement provides clarity around the higher level organisational context. In other words, what is expected of the organisation. The requirements are the specific outcome statements that the service will need to demonstrate performance against. So these are numbered, the number of requirements varies from standard to standard. And where standards apply, the organisation will need to meet the consumer outcome and the organisational statement by demonstrating performance or outcomes against the requirement level. Now, we've kept the numbering consistent with the legislation.
Yep. Thank you, Atawa. So that's another change for us. We've now got the requirements are and the standards are numbered as per the legislation. So we're going to actually now take you through each of the standards. We're going to have a talk about each of them. So you might want to actually follow along if you've got your standards fact sheet with you. What I'd encourage you to do is, while we're talking through these, is look for the key words, highlight these and think about what they actually mean in your service as we take you through the next couple of slides. So our first standard is Standard 1, which is consumer dignity and respect. So the consumer outcome for this standard is I am treated with dignity and respect and can maintain my identity. I can make informed decisions. I can make informed choices about my care and services and live the life I choose. It's quite a compelling consumer outcome, don't you agree, Peter?
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about, Atawa's talking to this one. My apologies. Atawa, tell us a little bit about Standard 1.
Okay, so Standard 1, consumer dignity and choice. This standard is the central of all the other standards and is considered the foundation standard. It will apply to all organisations. So Standard 1 has 6 concepts that are important to reflect on. We talk about dignity and respect, identity, culture and diversity, cultural safety, choice, dignity of risk, information, and personal privacy. I'd just like to take you through 3 of these concepts and give a bit more detail. When we talk about identity, culture, and diversity, all aged care services are expected to deliver care that is non-discriminatory and inclusive. Respecting a person's identity, culture, and diversity also means understanding the individual's needs and preferences and providing care that is reflective of this. Cultural safety. This is about the consumer's culture. So the consumer defines what is culturally safe. The key features of cultural safety are understanding a consumer's culture, acknowledging the differences, being actively aware and respectful of the differences, and planning care and services that alter to these differences. Dignity of risk, This is about the right of the consumer to make choices about their care and services, and also the need to balance risk whilst preserving autonomy. This standard emphasises the need for an organisation to support the consumer to understand the consequences of their choices, but also weigh up the risk to the consumer and others and how they're going to manage this. So in other words, it's about organisations supporting consumers to live the life they choose the way they choose.
Yeah, to meet the consumer outcome.
Yes.
I think, thanks for that, Atawa. I would say that from our getting to know the standards face-to-face sessions, dignity of risk has been one of those areas that has created lots of conversation. So we would encourage people to have that conversation in your organisation. Dip into the guidance. You know, we're talking about Standard 1 3D. So that's what you're looking for if you're looking for the guidance in relation to that specific requirement about taking risks. There's also some fantastic resources and references that have been included in the guidance to help the sector come along with some of these concepts. They're not necessarily new, but they've not been in our legislative framework before in this way, at this level of detail. So I'd really encourage you to engage with the Aged Care Diversity Framework, the Centre for Cultural Diversity Inclusive Service Standards, the Cultural Respect Framework for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Health, There's a supported decision-making aged care policy development guideline as well. So all of those I've just mentioned are actually linked in the guidance in the resources section of the guidance online, but also in the PDF version of the guidance. So I really think, being the foundation standard, this is the one that is going to be really important to focus on and get right and work with your staff on. So let's move on to Standard 2. And Standard 2 is ongoing assessment and planning with consumers. And the consumer outcome is, I'm a partner in ongoing assessment and planning that helps me get the care and services I need for my health and well-being. Atewa, do you want to tell us a little bit about what Standard 2 is about?
Okay. Yes, so I'll talk briefly about Standard 2, ongoing assessment and care planning with consumers. This standard is about assessment and planning that informs safe, quality and care and services. And it's in accordance to the needs, goals and preferences of the consumers, whilst mitigating the risk of adverse outcomes for our consumers. Under Standard 2, there are 5 requirements. And this standard also describes what the organisation needs to do to plan care and services with a consumer. So the purpose of ongoing assessment and care planning should be about meeting each consumer's needs, goals and preferences. It should also be about optimising their health and well-being. And this is an expectation that you work with in partnership with your consumer to understand what is important to them. I guess in line with Standard 1, it is expected that planning and making changes to care and services, the consumers are given options and supported to make informed decisions about their choices. Now, if you want to read more, pages 25 in the guidance material gives a bit more detail on the purpose and the scope of Standard 2.
Thanks. Thanks, Atewa. I think, again, I'd just point out some key things in Standard 2 and some excellent references and resources in the guidance material. So Standard 2 3B is about assessment and care planning, needs, goals, preferences, as you said, but it actually includes end-of-life planning if the consumer wishes. So I'd point you to a number of references and resources because that's quite a specific component of this standard. And there's the advanced care, the National Palliative Care standards, and there's principles for the palliative and end-of-life care and residential care. And again, the supported decision-making tool or policy development guideline is also important to consider and look at if you're looking at how you are going to demonstrate performance against Standard 2. Standard 3, clinical, personal and clinical care. The consumer outcome for this one is I get personal care, clinical care, or both personal and clinical care that is safe and right for me. So Peter, do you want to tell us a little bit about Standard 3?
Thank you, Gabby. Look, this standard is about the delivery of safe, effective and quality personal and clinical care as a basic consumer and community expectation. It sets out the requirements that underpin the delivery of consumer-centred, safe, effective and quality personal and clinical care. The standard applies to all services who deliver personal care, such as bathing, assistance with toileting and assistance with eating, or clinical care, such as nursing services. There's 7 requirements of the standard, and if you look at page 42 to 43 of the guidance material, it introduces these requirements and also provides some reflective questions that you can use as examples of the actions or the evidence to support the requirement.
Thanks, Peter. And I think, Standard 3, we've got some interesting keywords in here. So if you're following along and looking for those keywords, I draw your attention to requirement 3, Standard 3, 3A, and also Standard 3, 3B. So this talks about best practice, and these B talks about high prevalence and high impact risks associated. The guidance material here is very instructive for the sector, so I would strongly encourage you, if you're looking for what does the guidance say about what the high impact, high prevalent risks are in terms of personal care and clinical care? You've got that referenced in the guidance materials, so make sure you refer to standards 3B and A in relation to those. Same again, there's some great resources that you can tap into to look for information around best practice on these areas. And best practice is about evidence-based practice. So the guidance isn't definitive in covering all of these resources and evidence-based practice examples, but there is plenty there to help you in terms of if you're wanting to explore and understand more about those standards and the requirement. So let's move on to Standard 4. Standard 4 is about services and supports for daily living. So the consumer outcome here is I get the services and supports for daily living that are important to my health and well-being, and that enable me to do the things I want to do. Peter, what do you want to do?
Well, let's have a look at the standard. This standard requires organisations to provide services and supports for daily living in a way that enhances the consumer's well-being, quality of life, as a part of the consumer's well-being and quality of life. As part of the comprehensive assessment and planning process, consumers' needs are identified that the services and supports are required to help the consumer to continue having a meaningful life. Some organisations may not deliver personal care services or clinical care, or they may deliver other services in conjunction with personal care or clinical care. You'll see that this standard clearly refers to these services as services and supports for daily living. Some examples of these supports of daily living are domestic assistance, food services, and services that support consumers to engage in social activity and participate in community life. Again, I'll refer you to the guidance. Pages 69 to 70 of the guidance introduces these requirements, and the guidance material further highlights the intent of the requirement. And it also provides reflective questions, again, and examples of the actions and evidence that can support. You'll see that the services and supports for daily living should be provided in line with any clinical advice about a particular consumer. For example, catering services may need to be modified to avoid particular foods due to allergies or medical conditions, or have food textures modified for consumers who have difficulty swallowing. The standards are also about ensuring that consumers feel socially connected, have control of their lives, have privacy, and are able to contribute to those people or those things they feel connected to.
Thanks, Peter. I think this standard is really about seeing the whole person and supporting them to live a life that is independent, optimises their health and well-being and their quality of life. So this is a key standard.
Yeah,
it's very much embedded in our practice. So there's some, in terms of the requirements there, if you're following along, there's some, the standards are quite explicit now in terms of emotional, spiritual and psychological well-being. We've also got requirements around participation in the community and outside. It's very important that organisations understand the consumers they have and their story to support them to get their daily living supports.
And it very much aligns with those home-based services that provide services to people living in their own home, not only from the package care side, but from the lower community health home support services, the CHSP services that just deliver day-to-day support to people to get them to continue living in their home.
Supporting people living at home, absolutely. Yeah. Great, thank you. So now we are up to Standard 5. So Standard 5 is about the organisation's service environment. And the consumer outcome for this one is I feel I belong and I'm safe and comfortable in the organisation's service environment. I tell you what, this is one of the standards that only applies to certain services. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
That's right, Gabby. So Standard 5 is about the service environment. So this applies to the physical environment that the organisation provides for residential care, respite care, and your day therapy centres. It does not apply to home care services where the environment is in the consumer's home or external environments that the consumer might visit. So we're talking about your bowling clubs and the libraries. The standard covers more than just the security and safety. It's about recognising that a clean, comfortable, welcoming, well-maintained environment is essential to the quality of life. The focus of Standard 5 is on ensuring that where the organisation is providing a physical environment, the environment is fit for purpose, it supports quality of life and promotes independence, functions and enjoyments for the consumer. So in terms, for example, I think it's talking about creating an environment where your consumers feel welcome, an environment where they feel they can make their own, and an environment in which they can move around in or out. So this is whether the design and layout of the service should support your consumer's ability to participate in a community, and it should also allow them to move around the service. How consumers are supported to move freely within the service environment. So this includes indoor or outdoor areas that may be restricted at times or secure. If the environment encourages the consumer to interact, and not just with themselves, but with others as well. Whether consumers are able to make full use of the resources available to them. And this is through encouraging your consumers to personalise living areas. Also ensuring that they're consistent with work, health and safety obligations. But also ensuring the environment is welcoming and culturally appropriate in that it reflects the culture, the linguistic and spiritual needs of the consumers who use that environment. Now, Standard 5 is linked to both Standards 1 and 3 in that achieving a feeling of belonging, independence, interaction and function is linked to the service environment. And a safe, clean environment helps to minimise infection-based risks. This standard is not intended to duplicate work across your health and safety laws or under the building legislation. So really it's about to be mindful of the service environment we provide for our care and look at ways to personalise that environment.
And again, I'll point you to some resources, given that the majority, a high proportion of consumers living in residential aged care services have dementia or are living with dementia. There's a number of excellent resources that reflect a dementia-friendly environment and how you can support and create that. So you can look those up in the guidance, the resources and reference section of the guidance material. So moving on to Standard 6 now, which is feedback and complaints. And the consumer outcome for this standard is I feel safe and am encouraged and supported to give feedback and make complaints. I'm engaged in processes to address my feedback and complaints and appropriate action is taken. So, Atewa, feedback and complaints.
Yes.
We welcome them.
Yes, always. So Standard 6 is about feedback and complaints. This standard is about organisations having complaints resolution system that is accessible, confidential, prompt and fair. So it must support all your consumers to make a complaint or give feedback. It also must include a process of open disclosure in relation to open communication and then transparency of processes when things go wrong. I think open disclosure is a new term.
Yep.
And so I would encourage you to dig into the guidance material and read up on the definitions of open disclosure. Standard 6 has 4 requirements, and the intention is to encourage consumers to provide feedback on the organisation about their experience within the service. So whether that's positive or negative. The focus is on the qualities of the complaints management system that drives continuous improvement, informs service improvements and achieves resolution of issues for consumers and others.
Yeah.
So it's not just about having the system. It has to be a functioning, well-functioning
And making it
system.
work. Has to work.
So Standard 6 also draws key elements from effective complaints management. And this is described in a resource, the Better Practice Guide to Complaints Handling in Aged Care Services. I encourage you to look that up and have a read. The standard is also about recognising that local resolution of complaints can lead to faster and more sustainable outcomes and is more likely to preserve and build the relationship between the consumer and the organisation. I think that's a valid point to make. Acknowledging that it is important for consumers to feel safe and comfortable in giving feedback or making a complaint, and also reflects the fact that allowing for continuous improvement is an important part of service delivery. So again, to rotate, some consumers will face particular or additional barriers to providing feedbacks or making complaints. So consumers may have cognitive or communication difficulties, or language or cultural barriers. In some cases, the nature of the complaint may be particularly sensitive or private. Organisations are expected to support consumers to make complaints or provide feedback. I'll encourage you to look at pages 102 to 115 in your guidance material, and you can read a lot more around Standard 6. Thank you, Gabby.
So Atawa mentioned the Aged Care Complaints Commissioner Better Practice Guide to Complaint Handling in Aged Care Services, and I'm sure many of you have accessed that and got that. I just want to reflect on, I was at a Getting to Know the Standards session actually yesterday, and we had a service provider stand up and talk about something they're doing, which the new standards have actually prompted them to do, and it was in relation to feedback and complaints. So it was particularly in relation to requirement from Standard 6.3b, and this is about access to advocates and language services and other methods of raising complaints. So this service, you know, the new standards have prompted them to look at their systems and processes, and they actually realised that they really didn't have good access to advocates and to, you know, language services. So they've reached out into their local community and connected with some translating services. And they also have now linked into OPAN, which is the Older Persons Advocacy Network. And they're finding that through working with those organisations, they've been able to improve their approach, and they're actually getting some results. The results are that they are finding that people are actually providing more feedback that's actually more valuable. So that's a really practical example of a service that's actually already moving forward, and you know, the new standards have prompted them to review their practice and process. So I thought that was great. It was very encouraging to see that, absolutely. Okay, so we're up to the last two, the lucky last two. So, look, this Standard 7 is human resources. Our sector is made up of about 360,000 aged care workers. Of that, there's about 240,000 direct care workers. So we're not small by any means. No. So let's talk about Standard 7, human resources, and the consumer outcome is I get quality care and services when I need them from people who are knowledgeable, capable and caring. So 360,000 workforce this standard applies to. Peter, let's talk about people.
Luckily, I don't have to name them all.
No, lucky.
This standard really focuses on organisations having skilled and qualified workforce sufficient to deliver and manage safe and quality care and services. An effective human resources system supports the competency of an organisation's workforce and the delivery of safe, respectful and the quality and care services. You'll notice, and as Ateo had mentioned in other standards, these are stringently linked to standards. In this particular, it's standards 1, 2, 3 and 8. These requirements in this standard focuses on organisations having skilled and a qualified workforce and sufficient to manage safe and quality care and services. An effective human resource system supports the competency of an organisation. You'll notice pages 116 to 117 of the guidance material again introduces these requirements and further highlights the intent of the requirements. You'll also notice that these standards have 4 key concepts. The first one being the sufficiency of the workforce. An organisation providing aged care services are required to have an adequate numbers of appropriately skilled staff to meet consumer needs. and use Australian government funding to make sure they have the staffing mix and numbers they require for their customers to receive high-quality care. The attributes, attitude, and performance of the workforce. In addition to having necessary skills and capabilities and knowledge, the workforce must be able to perform their role effectively and have the ability to communicate and engage in positive relationships with consumers and have a commitment to consumer-centred care. Organisational support. My fingers got stuck, I'm sorry. Organisational support for the workforce. The workforce should be supported, trained and equipped to deliver the outcomes that these standards require. And finally, assessment, monitoring and review. The standard requires that organisations should regularly assess, monitor and review the makeup, suitability and performance of its workforce. This is critical to an organisation's ability to deliver safe and quality services that are responsible to consumers' needs and preferences.
So thanks, Peter. I think this standard is very much linked to Standard 1. The workforce, and particularly I'll draw your attention to Standard 7.3b, which is the workforce interactions with consumers are kind, caring and respectful of each consumer's identity, culture and diversity. So again, I think a really practical example here of what services are doing and starting to do to transition to the new standards is really getting in and looking at Standard 1, looking at those 7 key concepts that you explained, Atewa, and how their workforce understand them and implement them in their everyday practice. And that will go a long way to supporting good quality outcomes for consumers, but also in terms of demonstrating performance against both Standard 1 and Standard 7. So the final standard we're going to talk about, well, it is the final standard, it's Standard 8, which is organisational governance. Now, this standard, this has existed in the home care quality common standards, but in residential care there hasn't been as, there's been a standard in Standard 1, but I think this time Standard 8 takes us to a different level. So organisational governance is Standard 8. And the consumer outcome for this one is I am confident the organisation is run well. I can partner in improving the delivery of care and services. So, Peter, let's talk about organisational governance.
Thank you, Gabby. Look, this standard is really about governance and the provision and oversight and accountability of how an organisation works. Different organisations have different corporate structures and governing bodies. And this standard recognises that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to effective governance. Again, I can refer you to the guidance material that provides some introduction to these requirements, but really there's some key elements in the standards that are accountable at all levels of an organisation. The major one, which we've talked about a lot today, is partnering with consumers. The standard requires really that organisations demonstrate that they seek a consumer's views, listens to them and learns from their experience. And a good example of this would be the involvement of consumers in the planning of a strategic direction, the design of brochures, the design of new buildings, and the development of a consumer advisory or resident committees, which we do see in resident areas and we do see in our reviews in the community. We quite often see that there are community advisory committee, but this really embeds it across all the standards.
Yeah.
Promoting the right cultures. Leaders are critical in influencing the quality care and the services through their expectations, the support they provide to staff, their shaping of the culture, the setting of direction, and the monitoring of progress in the safety and the quality and performance of the work they do. The standard focuses on the importance of active leadership and the need for strategies for the delivery of safe care and to make sure that these are monitored. Supporting quality, such systems must include, and I'll read these off, but they're clearly written and spelt out, and I'm only just highlighting them here. Continuous improvement, risk management, information management, as we've spoken about often today, the practicing of open disclosure, ensuring clear responsibilities and accountabilities. Systems to support compliance and legislative requirements. New words coming in here, antimicrobial stewardship, identifying and responding to abuse and neglect of consumers, minimising the use of physical and chemical restraint, and also to enable effective clinical governance. Some new words have crept in there over this period of time.
Yeah.
The standard is intended to encourage managers and governing bodies, as well as clinicians, to be engaged in clinical governance and the quality improvement so that clinical and managerial priorities are aligned. It really is bringing things together, conversations that have happened for a long time in organisations, but now as an agency, we can look at these through the standards and give people an opportunity to demonstrate how they're doing this.
That's right. And I think this standard is an opportunity, you know, the consumer outcome is that they're a partner in improving the delivery of care and services. So think about how your organisation partners with consumers in terms of organisational governance. Yes, Peter mentioned committees and community, what were they? Community
Advisory committees, they have lots of different words.
Yep. So there's that, but there's also other ways to partner with consumers that you can explore and think about. So in terms of the new concepts, in the Getting to Know the Standards face-to-face sessions, we've had people talking about things like antimicrobial stewardship. And we draw you to, if you're wanting more information on that, we draw you to the resources and references in the guidance material, and there's some specific policy guidelines to support your organisation if you're looking for more information on that, and at a governance level, obviously. There's also a decision-making tool for supporting a restraint-free environment that's particularly relevant to residential care. And there's, for some services where they might be quite small, but this standard applies, there's a good governance principles and guideline for not-for-profit organisations. So, you know, we'd encourage you to talk to your boards, board members online, make sure you've looked at the guidance and understand your obligations under Standard 8. So thanks for guiding us through the standards and giving us a bit of overview of the intent. We did refer to the guidance, and all of the information we've talked about today is in the guidance material. So and we're going to take you through that shortly. So there's linkages across the standards. So Peter and Atawa both alluded to there being different linkages across the standards, and it'd be true to say in every session we've had face-to-face, the cameras come out and take a photo of this slide. So people are very interested in the linkages. So can you explain a little bit about the linkages and what that really means?
Well, even looking at the actual much photographed diagram, it really shows that the standards should never be considered in isolation. Instead, organisers should consider how these links and how the quality outcomes for consumers can be demonstrated across all the standards. You'll note, and we've talked about it all day, the consumer is firmly the focus of these standards, and the standards provide a framework that underpins the requirements. You'll see the standards are centred on physical support, while others provide organisational monitoring and culture. You'll also notice that in the table how important to understand when preparing for your self-assessment. And you will notice that standards, particularly Standards 1 and particular Standards 8, really are the overarching standards that wrap around all the rest of the standards. You'll notice there's a tick in all the top boxes and all the bottom boxes, and you'll see how they relate to every other standard. This also helps when preparing a self-assessment. It may assist you in not having to duplicate things and also being able to tell your story and the narrative of how your services are run. Going back to this as a guide to help you realise that the standards aren't isolated, they all work together.
Thank you. And that's very much what we've tried to portray in the standards image, we're calling it, the standards image, the wheel. We've got the consumers at the centre, supported by all around by the other standards. So I think it's really important that people understand the linkages, and yes, there are distinct requirements you're going to have to just demonstrate performance against. But as Peter mentioned, there is a way to build information so you're not duplicating and doubling up. So we're actually now going to start to look at the guidance material, and Atawa is going to take you on a little bit of a web safari. Now, Atawa was actually, and there was good engagement with the guidance, which is great. So Atawa was actually part of the team who was helped to develop the guidance.
That's correct.
Yeah. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that process and then maybe do a bit of a show of
Show and tell.
how it works?
Thank you, Gabby. So the Quality Agency has worked with service providers, consumers, and other stakeholders on the guidance material. So the guidance was reviewed, it was piloted and evaluated many times to ensure it meets the needs of providers, staff, quality surveyors, consumers, and other stakeholders. You can find more information on this process on the Quality Agency website. So this guidance material has been written for organisations that provide Commonwealth subsidised aged care services and is designed to support organisations and their workforce. All right, Gabby, so we might just go
Jump
to
in.
the website.
So you should all be seeing a little window on your webinar screen, and you can maximise that window if you want to bring this up to a larger size. Just remember to minimise it again after we've shown. But Atay was just going to take you through the structure and content in the guidance.
Thank you, Gabby. So let's start at the top, and I'll encourage you all to go to the intro tab. This provides a lot of the definitions and the scopes for the guidance material. So I'd encourage you to always start at that point. Now, and as you move across, you'll see each of the standards are listed across the page. We'll just take a look at standard 1 because the other standards are replicated in the same way. So once I hover over standard 1, you see this drop-down box. When I click on 1.3a, another box comes up, and here we've got listed the intention of this requirement, reflective questions, and examples of actions or evidence. So the intention of the requirement is to support consistent interpretation and a shared understanding of the standard and the intention of that standard. Your reflective questions, these are prompts to consider current and cultural practices within your organisation. Examples of actions and evidence. It's also broken down into the workforce, consumer, and other organisation. This is just to give you some examples of evidence that you could possibly consider when demonstrating your performance against the standards. I'll now take you to these tabs on the left-hand side of the page. So the first one is your legislation. We have included references to important pieces of legislation. They have been broken down by topics. So I encourage you to click on the tab and have a look. I won't go into that. We have the glossary. Now, as we've all mentioned, there are new terms that have crept up throughout the standards. This is your go-to. The glossary will give you an understanding of the key terms and what the meaning is behind them. We've also got this tab for case studies. These case studies are there to give you examples of good performance or what we consider as good performance, and gives you an idea of some of the things to consider for your service. Now, this is also an opportunity to encourage all our consumers out there across the sector. If you feel you have an example of a good case study, this could be to do with end of life, culture and diversity, please send it in. We have the Quality Agency policy at aacqa.gov.au. Would love to see these case studies come through, and they may end up on the website. As you go further down, we have the guidance resources. Now, Gabby alluded to the fact that the resources are at the back of each standard on the PDFs. However, we have also got them on the website, and they are listed by themes or topic areas here. As we go down, we've got the consumer resources. Now, I encourage you to keep an eye out on this tab. We will be launching a lot more products come 2019. in the Commission. We've also got a link to other resources here. This just to give you a quick overview of the guidance material and where to go to look for some of the information you may be interested in.
Yep. Thanks, Atewa.
Good job.
So we've actually been asked this question a lot. Are we going to be producing hard copies of the guidance for purchase?
No, Gabby. The guidance will not be produced and sold as hard copies. There is, however, the PDF that can be downloaded and printed. So what the thinking behind this is that the Quality Agency is committed to updating the guidance material quite regularly. Revisions will be promoted through the Quality Standard newsletter. And the sector can expect that 1 to 2 annual updates will be available.
Yeah.
So we encourage you to go to the website to download the PDFs.
Sure. Yep, or save them on your desktop. Might be a good way to go. Atewa mentioned the case studies and invited people to submit more. We would really love to get more case studies and populate that as examples of, and if you read those, you'll see that they're ways a service has approached resolving a matter or resolving an issue. So there's the case studies are presented as a bit of an issue or a problem. Then there's what the service did and, importantly, what the outcome is. And we've got to keep remembering that these standards are about outcomes for consumers with a consumer focus. And I think that really comes through with the case studies. So don't forget that one thing about the guidance is this is not a legal document. It's not part of the legislative framework. It's not legislated. It is not mandatory. It is there to assist you. It is guidance.
Yeah.
So, but Atewa mentioned the intent. The intent, I can't stress how important the intent is. And the intent is about having a shared understanding between the sector and the agency in terms of what that standard is about and what that requirement is about. So that's where we start our conversations in terms of looking at what this actually means. So I think that's really fantastic. Each organisation should interpret the guidance considering your own service delivery model. This guidance applies across all, like the standards, applies to all sectors. It's not just for residential, it's not just for home care, it's not just for Natsi Flex Care, it's for all services. So you really need to, again, focus on the outcomes and the manner in which they will be demonstrated, which always has been unique to that service provider and the consumers that they have. So in terms of how we're going to talk a little bit about how the agency is going to assess performance in the minute, but I think what I'd like to share with you is some practical ways that we know services are moving forward in terms of what they're doing to transition during this transition period. So we mentioned earlier the transition period is happening now. And the first assessments against the new standards commence on 1 July 2019. So 7 months away by my calculation. So look, we've had examples come up through our face-to-face sessions, and also we asked when you registered for this webinar if you could share with us some examples. So we've had some services come back and say that they are actually using the examples of actions and evidence in the guidance to start conversations with their staff, to actually start the conversation about the intent and what's required and actually what that means in practice, and importantly, how that contributes to the consumer and the organisational outcomes. I think that's a great initiative. Another really simple one is we've had hundreds of downloads of the standards image. Now, Atewa pointed to the other resources section. You can download this image and incorporate it into your training materials. There's also this exact flyer is there as a downloadable poster. You can start to put those up around your services or include them with your consumer information, with your staff handbooks and staff information to help engage in conversation about the new standards. We also, at the actual face-to-face events, I encouraged you earlier to look at keywords. And I think I can't stress that enough. You need to identify the keywords in the consumer outcome, discuss what they mean, look at the positives and the challenges, but also look to the solutions. I think that's what we need to have, a really solution-focused, outcome-focused, that's what the standards reflect, so that's how we need to approach it. So there's just some practical ideas. I suppose new ways of engaging with consumers is another thing that's come through the sessions. And, you know, we mentioned committees, and, you know, there's been a lot of talk about surveys, but I think it's worth looking at other new ways to explore how you partner with consumers and beyond their individual care and service needs. So that's about how some examples might be how they're included. We've had a service tell us, and this might be more common practice than we know, consumers are actually involved in the recruitment and selection processes of staff now. They're involved in onboarding processes, so not just with staff, but also with other new consumers, showing prospective families and consumers around services. They're taking, some services are taking consumer meetings or resident committees to a different space. They're actually reframing these as expert panels or focus groups that address really specific issues and opportunities for improvement in relation to care and service delivery. So I think they're excellent examples of partnering with consumers to ensure service delivery improvement. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit now about the agency's approach to gathering information. So Peter, can you take us through this one?
Yeah, sure. From our perspective, as myself as a surveyor, I mean, some things have never changed. I mean, we expect, and the guidance indicates that services must be able to demonstrate the following for each requirement: that they actually understand the requirement, that they apply the requirement, and it is evident in the way the care is provided. They monitor how the requirement is being applied and the outcome achieved. And they review outcomes and adjust practice based on review. Basically, your continuous improvement processes and how you ensure things are moving forward all the time.
So Peter, just to reiterate too, again, connecting back to the guidance, understanding the requirement, that would be where you would go to the intent.
Yeah,
if you're not
so.
sure about what a requirement is about or what it's asking, that's where you head. You look for the intent of this requirement. The way that you apply the requirement is evident in the way care is provided. Again, the guidance helps you here. Look at the reflective questions. Consider those, ask yourself those. That's what they are all about. How does this apply to us? What do we do? How do we do it? Yeah. In terms of monitoring and outcomes and changes in practice, this is, again, the guidance helps you. The guidance has examples of actions and evidence. Now, I will stress that's not a definitive list and it's not a checklist.
It's not exhaustible.
But in terms of the agency's approach to gathering information, our shared understanding starts with the intent. We will be using the guidance to inform our approach and how we will gather information against the new standards. So this slide, the information on this slide is actually in the introduction in the guidance. So again, Atawa mentioned, don't skip over the introduction. There's some really important information in the introduction about the Equality Agency's assessment of performance. So Peter, assessment of performance, how do we do it? Is anything changing?
Really, our audit methodology isn't going to change, and it hasn't changed. And as we mentioned earlier, there's just a lot of new language. And this will mean we'll be having a series of different conversations with management, staff and consumers and their representatives to ensure that there is a shared understanding of the concepts like partnerships with consumers, high risk and high impact risks, and open disclosure. And these are just to name a few. We'll continue to gather information from key sources through our interviews, observations and document reviews. We'll gather our information through consumer interviews and inform a line of inquiry that we can pursue during our visits. In residential area, we do have the consumer experience report.
Yep.
and we do believe that is now being worked on. There will be a similar format used when we do our community reviews. The information to be useful, it has to be factual. It needs to be relevant to the expected outcome that we're assessing. It needs to be accurate, based on facts, something that is known and proved to be right. It needs to be corroborated. There's great importance in corroborating information, in checking and validating and gathering. It helps us confirm how this information is usable. We'll continue using our sampling approach, and those people who've worked with us will know that we can't look at everything. But we take enough information to ensure that the information we're gathered is appropriate and a good cross-section about the consumers, staff and their representatives. And we'll continue to use a risk-based approach when we assess against the standards.
Yep. So what I'm hearing is our assessment of performance hasn't changed, but the conversations we'll probably have with the sector will.
Yeah.
We've got new language, we've got new standards. We'll be asking for different things, having different conversations with staff, with the organisation and with consumers.
Yeah.
So Peter mentioned our risk-based approach. For those of you who are wondering what that's all about, if you haven't read this already, I strongly recommend you access and download this from the agency's website. It's in the About Us tab, I believe. It's a paper we published in April this year, and it's called Strengthening Our Approach to Risk, the Way We Manage Quality and Safety. So if you want to know more, we don't have a lot of time to talk about this one today, but this is definitely, if you haven't read it, we would strongly recommend you engage with this, and it will help people the sector to understand what we mean when we say a risk-based approach. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. All right. So now we're going to move on to self-assessment, and this was part of, this is what we're actually recommending you take on next. So, Atewa, let's talk a little bit about why should services undertake a self-assessment against the new standards?
Thank you, Gabby. So a self-assessment is an opportunity for evaluation of your current practices against the quality aged care standards. And it's also a way of identifying the strengths, the weaknesses and areas for improvement within your service. Now, it's important to note that undertaking a self-assessment is an effective way of developing your continuous improvement plan.
Absolutely.
So what do I mean by this? You might identify strengths, achievements, weaknesses, or areas for improvement within your self-assessment. It's now an opportunity to take these areas for improvement and add them into your continuous improvement plan so that then you can implement them, monitor and evaluate them through the continuous plans process. In terms of self-assessment, it also allows you to build an organisational culture that understands and values the self-assessment process and is also used to improve safety and quality of care for consumers, for their experience and also the outcomes. It prepares you for your reaccreditation audits, which is quite important. And also for the application process. But again, I think for me, Gabby, it's really important to have that link between the self-assessment and your continuous improvement plan and how the self-assessment feeds into your continuous improvement plan.
It's great to have an understanding of that. So, Atewa, there's the questions up here. What do we do to meet the outcome? How do we know it works? What areas could we improve? That definitely explains how we, and then feeding into the CI plan. Is there any sort of things that you'd suggest, the types of questions they should ask in addition to those in relation to these requirements? Does the guidance help us there?
It does. I think we'll go back again to the intent of the standard and the requirement. The words are there for you. Use them. Use these keywords to have conversations with your workforce within the organisation. Have conversations with your consumers. You look at the practices and processes and what you're currently doing to meet the standards. Look at the results you've achieved and ways you can demonstrate your consumer outcomes. Because I understand a lot of people are demonstrating consumer outcomes. It's about drawing that information down and making it visible for the quality agency. So just to keep you informed, the quality agency is currently drafting a new self-assessment tool and it will support the new standards. This will be available on the website. So just keep an eye out for when this will come. But we still currently have the 3 self-assessment tools that are available on the quality agency.
And that's on the current applicable standards. Yep.
Yep.
So, yeah, there will be, this question has been asked over and over again, and I've actually already seen it come through here when people asking questions about the self-assessment tool. It's almost what people start to ask when we've had the face-to-face sessions, when is the self-assessment tool coming out? So the self-assessment tool is, as Ataya said, will be available, we believe, by the end of the year. At the moment, it's actually being piloted with the sector. So we will make sure that the sector is aware of when that's available, and the Quality Standard newsletter, if you're not already subscribed to that, we strongly recommend that you do that. So we've got a little bit of time for a couple of questions here that have come through. We've got a question from Richard in New South Wales. Will the quality surveyors follow the guidance when assessing? Peter?
We'll use the guidance. The guidance will help us inform as we work through. The guidance will help us work with the provider when we do our assessments. It's a document that will live and work and help us inform, and it will help us have the conversations. It'll be a growing document, and as you've said, it's going to be added to, and it's going to help us strengthen the way we hold these conversations. I think that's the best way to describe it.
That's right.
And talking today and looking at things, what I see the guidance being in this term, it's going to be a living document. It's going to keep growing, and it really will help us inform what we're doing.
Yeah. It'll be our shared understanding, the sector and the agency's shared understanding.
And we can follow and we can interpret the intent and talk. You can talk about the intent to us. It'll give everybody an area where we can talk. An area of commonality is the way.
Yep. No, that's great. So we've got a question here about, it was about a small service. So it's disappeared. Sorry about that. I'll try and find that again. So Helen from South Australia asks, if we follow the guidance, will we be compliant with the standards? Ataya? Is the guidance a recipe book or a checklist?
No, it's not.
No?
Again, it's in the name. It is guidance material. So it's not a legal document, and it does not form part of the quality standards. It's not the mandatory legislative requirement. These are all set out under the standards. So I guess the guidance is there as a resource to support your understanding of the standards and how you demonstrate assessment against those standards. We understand that, organisations vary in size and structure, so the ways in which you expect to see it will be quite different from service to service. But most importantly, the guidance is not prescriptive. It's not clinical guidance. It is guidance on how to apply the standards.
Yeah, our shared understanding.
Yeah.
I think that's what
that's
really our framework, is our shared understanding. There's a question here from Jane. It's difficult to locate the entire guidance document from the website. Can you please indicate where it's located? So what you will need to do is go to the Quality Agency homepage, aacqa.gov.au. And then in that top menu, if you scroll down, you will see an access the guidance and resources. So it's a link in the top part of that website, and that will take you through to the guidance homepage. Now, the guidance homepage, I don't know if you're seeing Ataya's screen again, but the guidance homepage, actually on that front page, just about 2 paragraphs down, it says download Standards 1 to 8 PDF. That is the actual document that we have printed and bound for ourselves. So that is where the full version of the guidance is, just there. So I think we are showing that screen. Yep. Okay, so you should be able to find it there. If you have further issues, please email us at qualityagencypolicy.aacqa.gov.au and we'll be able to make sure you get a copy. Here's a question about re-accreditation around June or July. So this is a transitional matter. This question has actually come up a little bit in the sessions. So which standards apply? If you're due for quality review or re-accreditation around June or July, what applies? The transitional arrangements are still being worked through and the sector will be advised about that. But what the Quality Agency has undertaken to do is to advise providers at the time their application for re-accreditation is due, that they which standards will apply. Similarly, with quality review, there's a shorter notice period with quality review. And so I do understand people's questions because it takes quite a while to prepare for quality assessment. We understand that, and a lot of preparation goes into quality assessment. So having clarity about which standards apply is important to providers. So what I would suggest, if you do have a specific question about when your service is due and you need to understand that, you can get in contact with your relevant regional director through our state office regional office contact details on our website. So we'd encourage you to do that. There's a question here about other education that the agency is offering to support the sector during the transition. So in addition to these 140-odd sessions, we are also going to continue to add to the other resources section of the guidance material. So we hope we will be publishing the slides from the Getting to Know the Standards sessions. We are also working on a Getting to Know the Standards for Aged Care Workers Q Assist module, and we hope to publish that early next year. Early next year will be under the new commission, and there will be a series of preparing for the standards better practice events. These events are due to kick off in February, and they will be include staff from the new commission. There'll be plenary sessions and workshop sessions, and the workshop sessions will be built around really practical application and practical preparation for the standards. So that's some of the next steps. We've had a lot of questions about our understanding accreditation and understanding quality review courses. Those courses at the moment are in review. We are reviewing those in light of obviously the new standards, but also the new rules that we will transition to under the Commission. So those programs, there are no dates at the moment for 2019, but we hope to be promoting those around March or April for people who want to get more detailed training on that area. Okay. Kay asks, is the recording to watch again at a later date? Yes, we will be making this recording available for people to access if we did a good enough job.
Yeah, film star.
Okay, so I think now that's all the time we've got for questions. If you've asked further questions, what we will be doing is we will feed those into a frequently asked questions and we'll be publishing those on our website. So thanks for sending in your questions. We'd like to share a little video with you on preparing for the standards. This video is available on the guidance section of the website. So we'll just play that for you now.
Quality standards will come into effect and will apply to all commonly funded aged care services. The new standards focus on improved outcomes for consumers. There are 8 standards: consumer dignity and choice, ongoing assessment and care planning with consumers, personal care and clinical care, services and supports for daily living, organisation service environment, feedback and complaints, human resources and organisational governance. It is essential your aged care organisation meets the new standards and is able to demonstrate this during a quality assessment. Here are 5 ways to get started. 1. Get to know the standards and the guidance materials. How will they influence your culture and inform your practice? 2. Create awareness. Everyone needs to know how the new standards apply to their work. Think about the consumers in your organisation and how you can support them to understand the standards. talk to consumers and their families about the standards and what they'll mean for them. 3. Undertake a self-assessment. Reflect on your everyday practices. Do they meet the new requirements? What are the opportunities for improvement? And are there any areas where you risk not meeting the standards? 4. Create a plan to improve performance. Consult with individuals in your organisation. Let them know how they can get involved. Look for ways to improve your organisation's outcomes. This could include exploring new ways of engaging directly with consumers, reviewing existing systems or processes, and training for staff and volunteers. Finally, put the plan into action and be ready for quality assessment. To help, we've created guidance information that explains the standards and how you might meet them. Access these on our website. The new aged care quality standards focus on outcomes for consumers so we can all have greater confidence in the quality of aged care across Australia.
We hope you enjoyed that little video. We created that animation to really be a call to action. The transition to the new standards has begun. The Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission will commence assessment and monitoring against the new standards from 1 July 2019. So take action now. Get to know the standards. Get to know the standards and talk to people in your organisation. We've talked about saying having conversations with people, start the conversation, reflect on your everyday practice, undertake a self-assessment, be ready for July 2019, understand the impact on your systems, policies and processes and what needs to be realigned. I'm sure there'll be plenty of continuous improvement plans looking full of actions for people. So really, the transition period has begun. It's really important for you to take action. We had another question come in about the email address. We've got that on a slide at the end, so I'll be able to show you that. So that's nice and clear. But I think there's just a couple of little updates I'd like to give you before we finish up today, and that's in relation to the transition to the new Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. The Minister actually announced to the sector on Tuesday that the legislation has passed to establish the nation's first independent Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. The Minister said the role of the Commission will be to implement a strong but fair regulatory framework that will protect and enhance senior Australians' quality of life, safety, health and wellbeing. So the new Commission will start on 1 January 2019. Janet Anderson has been appointed as the Commissioner Designate and will officially commence in her role as the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commissioner on 1 January. We've had Associate Professor Michael Murray has been appointed as the Interim Clinical Chief Advisor. And he'll be working with the Commission to provide clinical advice and support to the surveyors. The Commission will be supported by an advisory council. And what the Commission actually brings together is the Quality Agency and the Complaints Commissioner staff. So we're coming in together under the Commission in 2019, but soon after that, about a year later, we'll have the aged care regulatory functions of the Department of Health joining us from 1 January 2020. So just to sum up today, for further information, if you are looking for further information on the guidance, on unannounced reaccreditation audits, on Q-Assist modules, on fact sheets or posters, visit the Quality Agency website, and there's the email address, qualityagencypolicy@aacqa.gov.au. So please email us if you put in a question today or you think of a question after this webinar, or when you're working through the guidance you have a question. Your questions are very welcome. We are gathering a lot of questions and we will put together a frequently asked questions information section on the website. For further information about the standards or other government budget initiatives that were announced, you should visit the Department of Health website. And if you're looking for information about best practice approaches to complaints management or resources for consumers in relation to complaints, please visit the Aged Care Complaints Commissioner's website. What's worth noting is that there will be a new Commission website. So come 1 January, and the content from the Complaints Commissioner website and the Quality Agency website will transition to the new Commission. So there will be a new URL, but the sector will be advised about that in due course. So we hope today's information session and webinar has provided you with an overview and orientation to the guidance, and you feel ready to take the next steps or continue on your journey. It might have reinforced what you're already doing and taking action. Start the conversations, keep the conversations going. Keep going with your self-assessment, actioning your actions on your continuous improvement plan. As I mentioned, if you've got further questions, please send them in. Thank you to my colleagues, Peter and Atawa, for joining me today.
Thank you, Gabby.
And just again, another little plug for our Preparing for the Standards events. They will be promoted in the next edition of the Quality Standard, which is our next issue, is due out, I believe, in a couple of days. So if you're interested in coming to the next lot of quality agency education on the new standards, look out for the Preparing for the Standards series of events, which start off in February next year. But to close off today, I'd like to share a little story that actually came up at one of our information sessions, a face-to-face information session. And I think this story really goes to the heart of the standards and the focus on outcomes for consumers. So the story goes that there was a service and they decided to put on a community event. And this community event was a barn dance. And they invited their consumers from home care, they invited families, and they included all the consumers from the residential service as well, including those people living with dementia and those people with limited mobility. So by all accounts, the barn dance was a great success. There was a bonfire, hay bales, dancing, music, food. It was really enjoyed by everyone. There was this one lady named Betty, let's call her Betty, and she was being taken back to the facility. She had limited mobility and she was being put into bed by two carers, using the lifter back into bed. And she said to her care workers, I've really had the best night tonight. You just don't know how much it's meant to me to be able to be outside and to look at the stars, because that's something I haven't done since I've moved in here. And I think that really moved me, and I think that really goes to the heart of the focus on outcomes for consumers. So get to know your consumers, get to know their story, get to know what's important to them, understand what they want as opposed to what they need. The little things that might seem insignificant or things we might take for granted in everyday service delivery can really be the things that make a difference to a consumer's quality of life and their experiences of care and services they receive from your organisation. So I just want to leave you with that thought. The little things count. Thanks, everyone.
That's okay.
Thank you.